Don't tell me you know an argument if you don't want to talk about it. Don't tell me that an argument is essential to your position and then run away the second I ask you about the argument. Oh, you guys didn't make yourself look very good today. I beg to differ, sir. All right. So we'll go on to, Nick in Virginia. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, so Matt,
and
my friend told me that you were trying to become a pastor.
Yeah, that was my goal at one point.
Okay, so before you decided to stop being a Christian,
that wasn't a decision. I just I reached a point where I was no longer convinced that Christianity was true. It's not like I said, right. I'm done being a Christian. You don't choose what you believe.
Yeah, before you came to that conclusion, why did you believe?
Yeah, so when asked, I was convinced for much of the same reasons that anybody else would be convinced, because I thought that the Bible was the Word of God and that we had good reason to believe in the accuracy of it. I believed primarily because the people around me believed and taught me to believe. And when I actually started to investigate for good reasons for my belief, that all fell away. If I would have probably said, I would have given the same arguments that many other people did, Pascal's wager, teleological arguments. I probably would have presented something like the Kalam cosmological argument in some form, appealing. There had to have been a first cause, But when I began to understand what those things actually say and what we can demonstrate, I could not believe anymore.
Okay. So I thought about it, and I've come to the conclusion, well, there's a whole bunch of reasons why people believe in God. Mm-hmm. It might be that they're afraid of going to hell, or they've just grown up in that environment.
Yep.
So it's just something that they are used to. But I've only come up with 3 reasons that make sense to me. The first reason, which is the biggest reason, is without God, there's no, there can be no ultimate justice,
Oh.
Like, imagine, yeah.
So, without God, there can't be ultimate justice. If you were to actually put that together in a syllogism, it would be, premise 1, without God, there can be no ultimate justice. It would be, and then the next one is, there is some ultimate justice, therefore there needs to be a God. Essentially like a reductio ad absurdum. What makes you think that there?
Maybe he just wants there to be ultimate justice.
What makes you think that? What makes you think that there is ultimate justice?
Okay, well, because as people, if we desire to be moral, we want to be ethical. We cannot be happy morally, knowing that there's so much horrendous suffering going on in the world.
Why not?
We have empathy. What is the answer, right?
Why do our desires have any bearing on what is?
That's the main.
What
point.
makes you think there is in fact an ultimate justice?
I don't think that's evidence for there being ultimate justice.
Well, you presented this as one of the 3 reasons to believe that without a God you can't have ultimate justice. And
I'm saying it's a reason to, not to believe, but a reason to live in faith of God.
Okay.
It's a choice instead of a belief.
So unfortunately, I would want to file that under wishful thinking, right?
How do you determine which God?
Oh, how do you determine which God?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to believe just for the sake of convincing yourself through wishful thinking that there is some ultimate form of justice, which God is it?
Well, if the reason that you're believing is for there to be justice for people, then you research through the different religions that there are.
I'll buy that.
And so if you go to Islam and you see that the actions of the God or what he says is necessary for you to be saved aren't moral requirements, then that defeats the whole purpose of believing in him.
I'm fine with that. So which God do you think gets us to ultimate justice?
Say that again?
I'm fine with what you just said. And so if you were to evaluate all the different God claims and you wanted to pick the one that gets us to the sense of ultimate justice that you want, which one is it?
Mm-hmm. It's the God of Christianity.
Really? The God where God sacrifices his own son to serve as a loophole? The one where no matter how big of a sinner you are, no matter how many people you've killed, if you just call out to Jesus, you'll be saved and get to go to heaven. And yet if you're a good person who doesn't believe you go to hell, you consider that ultimate justice?
The one that laid out the rules for slavery?
So it's fine that Helen Keller, a Jew, is in hell under Christianity, and yet Adolf Hitler, who professed himself to be a Christian in private, might be in heaven. Or Jeffrey Dahmer, who had a last-minute salvation thing, might be in heaven. And you think that this is an ultimately just system? Did I say Helen Keller? I meant Anne Frank. I'm a moron sometimes.
Throw Gandhi in there, too. What the hell?
So under Christianity, someone who lived their life as a terrible human being could get saved near the end and go to heaven, correct?
Correct.
And me, let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that I'm a relatively decent person, live my life caring about other people and doing what I can. I never murder anybody or anything else along those lines, and yet I'm going to hell, and you think that that's a just system?
Well, you've stated a couple different doctrines that I don't believe myself, but the majority of Christians do.
Yeah. So not only out of wishful thinking are you going to go with Jesus is the one that gets us to a perfect justice, but you're going to do the particular version of Jesus that you've invented that doesn't match with modern Christianity or Orthodox Christianity. So how is this fundamentally different from just making up whatever you want to believe?
Well, I believe what I believe based on biblical evidence. So, like hell, for example, it's said to be eternal torture. So, but I don't believe that. I used to, but I looked into it, and the original Greek Bible, I don't believe, actually said anything about hell being eternal torture.
Yeah, you're not alone. You're not alone. Billy Graham and others buy into annihilation theory, that those of us who don't believe just cease to exist. Is that what you think?
Yeah, I'm undecided, either annihilationism or universalism. I really don't know.
Okay, so how is either of those justice? I mean, because justice is, by definition, people getting what they deserve. And mercy is a suspension of justice so that you get something that you don't deserve. So if none of us deserve an everlasting paradise, and some people are getting an everlasting paradise, that's a suspension of justice. So nobody's getting what they deserve.
Yeah. So, like, take Islam, for example. The way that you be saved in Islam is just, well, it's almost the same as Christianity, but there's a lot of legalism involved. You've got to pray this many times a day and all that. And then take Judaism. Well, it's pretty much the same thing. You've lots of legalistic ceremonial practices.
So what's wrong with that? What does that have to do with justice?
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
So, but in Christianity, you're saved by believing in Jesus, but not just that.
Oh.
Not just yeah.
Okay, under your version that might be the case, but if you actually look into soteriology, which is the study of what it takes to be saved, there's a number of different models where primarily, if you cite verses, it talks about being saved by grace through faith, that this is a gift of God, that there's nothing that you can actually do. So if you talk to Calvinists, you're not in any way responsible for your salvation. It has nothing to do with what you believe, because after all, the demons and the devil believe that Jesus is the Son of God.
Right.
And don't Calvinists also believe that pretty much nothing you do would make a difference?
Not completely true.
Okay.
But now we're down a
rabbit hole. Okay.
Go ahead, Nick.
The Bible does say that we are saved by believing in the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's true.
What does Jesus say it takes to be saved? Because I agree that there are other writers. Well, Jesus wasn't a writer, but John writes about salvation and Paul writes about salvation. But Jesus was specifically asked what it takes. I mean, if you're going to usher the Bible in, I don't think any of this is credible. But if you open up a red letter Bible, Jesus was asked what it took to be saved. What did he say?
He said, "You have to give up all your possessions and then come follow me."
No, he said, "Keep the commandments." And then he was asked,
well, yeah.
and then he was asked specifically which commandments, and then he prioritized the commandments that he thought were most important to salvation.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So isn't that fundamentally the same as the legalism you were criticizing the Jews about? Because after all, Jesus was a Jew.
No, you're following in Christianity. You're specifically told to follow a strictly moral law, but in Judaism and Islam, the laws that you have to follow aren't logical. They're arbitrary ceremonial practices. You have to do this a certain time of the day.
Are they arbitrary? Are they arbitrary if Moses received them from God?
At that time, they were logical because they fit into the plan. And
So what you're saying is something can become not logical?
Yeah.
Or God made a mistake, or it had to be fixed later?
No, it's not a mistake.
It's not? It wasn't a mistake to tell people that they could own people as slaves and beat them? That wasn't a mistake?
Those things were operated under the same moral principle then as they do now. They were right for that time because they fit into a moral...
So you're saying once upon a time it was morally correct to own people as slaves and treat them as property and beat them as long as they didn't die?
I'm not sure if the Old Testament exactly says that.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Exodus 21. Would you like to read it? And also in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, where it talks about slaves being your property that you can pass on to your children. So you're saying there was a time when that was moral?
You can what, your children?
Slaves are property that you can pass on to your children, just as you pass on your cows and your house and everything else.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's a time when that was moral?
It's hard to explain because it's...
No, it's not hard to explain, Nick. It's really easy to explain. There was no time when it was actually moral to own people as property.
It's not moral from a logical standpoint.
Oh my God. Okay, Nick, I apologize. I don't think you have even a clue about what a just system would be. If you're willing to hem and haw about slavery and argue that loopholes and God picking his chosen people and who goes to heaven, you're desperate to find some version of Christianity that you can invent, either with annihilationism or universalism, where we all go to heaven. If we all go to heaven, why the hell are we even spending any time talking about this? But in the end, you have no evidence or justification for your position. You have decided that you would like there to be ultimate justice. And then you have gone in search of what you can invent from a religion to be the best form of justice. And it's still fundamentally flawed. And it's still without any supporting evidence that this is actually true. So you can pick the best fiction book off the shelf you want and say, I would like to live in Ringworld, or I would like to live in Narnia, because I think that the systems of justice there are superior to what we currently have to deal with. And yet that doesn't tell us one thing about whether Ringworld or Narnia exist, which is the point that we need to care about. Because as it turns out, the world you want to exist has no bearing on the world that actually exists, and you spend your time focused on a fantasy, then you have just damned reality.
I see what you're saying, but what I was saying before about how is it moral for those things happening in the Old Testament? They were, in a sense, that they're in the context of a plan that is hard to explain because it's part of a narrative that God is telling for the purpose, which is what I was trying to get to, is that...
So basically you believe that God is too weak. He's strong enough to tell you not to wear mixed fabrics, but he's too weak to tell you not to own people as property.
The Old Testament is kind of like God playing a character.
Why would God do that? What kind of douchebag God pretends to, hey, you know what? I'm just going to sit here and play a character. You guys go ahead and own each other as property, and you can beat them as long as they don't die within a couple of days. You can, yes, keep slaves. Buy slaves from the heathen that surround you, because you guys are my chosen people. And then later on, I'll correct this. Except you know what? Never, ever corrected. Jesus doesn't come down and say, hey, all that crap about slavery, we were just pulling your leg.
Yeah, our secular morals are far better than the biblical morals.
You know, what does Jesus say about slavery?
I can't pinpoint verse.
Slaves, obey your masters.
Right.
Yeah, he could have fixed all that screw up, but he didn't.
Well, the Old Testament, its purpose is to validate the New Testament. It's to give us a reason to believe Jesus' ministry and all that he did.
Then it's an even bigger failure than I thought it was.
Why is that?
It gives me nothing that would make me believe the New Testament.
Well, it's the fact that it was written over such a long period of time, and that the culture of it.
I don't know how that's relevant. How long it takes to write something isn't a testament to whether or not it's true.
If the Bible
it's taken me years, and I'm still not done with my book. Does that mean when my book comes out, it's going to be true?
No.
Yeah.
But if a Bible is written,
how quick you are to dismiss! You are so quick to dismiss my book, which you haven't read and probably don't even know what it's about, and yet you're willing to accept a book that says you can own slaves and that blood sacrifice is useful for atonement.
Kill witches.
Kill witches. Don't wear mixed fabrics. Don't eat shellfish. I mean, how much of this book are you going to cherry pick to fit what you want? And when are you actually going to get to the thing that shows that it's true?
Okay, well, let me cycle back to why to believe in God in general.
Okay.
Even if I didn't have the Bible or some type of religious text, I would still believe in God.
Which God?
Because a God.
You would still believe in a God. What are the characteristics of this God that you would believe in?
Specifically, it'd be an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, not necessarily, but, well, yeah, I guess it would be, and omnibenevolent.
Cool. So even without any religious text, you would find it just warranted to believe in the omni God.
I would, and here's why.
Great. That's the important thing. Why?
Because, like I was saying before, if there's no ultimate justice without God, then we have to accept all of the horrible things that happen in the world.
Yes.
That will never be rectified without God. So
cool. They're not going to be rectified with God.
Well, they could be.
So it's possible that they could be.
Could be with a invisible pink unicorn that fixes everything too, right? Why do I not believe in that?
Yeah, and
a lot less baggage.
How did we get back to? Okay, let me ask this, and then I'll let you continue, no matter what the hell you say. Let me ask this. You said that you would believe in an omni God. And your first reason is because without an omni God, we can't have ultimate justice. So we're right back to where we began. And my response to that was, what on earth makes you think that there's an ultimate justice? And after dancing around for a while, you acknowledge that there may not be ultimate justice, but you'd like there to be. So basically, are we going to go through all of this so that you can say, even without a religious text, you would believe in an omni God because you personally want there to be an omni God?
Here's a mistake that I made. I said believe. What I really mean is to live in faith of. So what I was saying was.
So you wouldn't actually believe, but you think it's useful to pretend that you believe or act like you believe.
Well,
from our standpoint, faith is a good way to be wrong.
I can't believe based on evidence.
Why not?
That's impossible. Because there is no evidence for the Bible.
Oh, okay. You're saying that.
Thank you.
Sure. Woo. Somebody clip that out. I'm saying that the things that we should believe for good reasons, right? Do you not care whether your beliefs are true, or are you just mostly concerned with whether or not your beliefs are comforting?
Well, what I'm trying to get at is the reason I believe is for a practical, emotional benefit. Because being an atheist...
A practical emotional benefit, how is that distinguishable from I want to believe, or it makes me feel good to believe?
It's an act of living in faith. It's not really believing based on evidence, is what I'm saying.
I understand. You're not believing based on evidence. You are acting as if you believe because it makes you feel good.
Pretty much.
Okay.
That's where we're getting out of this.
Why does it make you feel good to believe something without a good reason to think that it's actually true?
Because if I don't live in faith of it, I have to accept all this immorality, and I cannot be happy if I have to accept it.
You don't have to. You don't have to accept.
How about Go ahead. Living life like you believe you won the lottery? Is that a good thing?
No, no. See, with God, when living in faith of God is the ultimate moral thing to live in faith of without evidence.
Okay. You say it's the ultimate moral thing, and I pointed out all these immoral things in the Bible. So it seems that you've invented a God that
Bible doesn't really matter.
Okay. It seems that you've invented a God that agrees with your views on morality.
Sure, I guess.
Okay. So
if I were king of the world would be great.
So we're not talking about Christianity. We're not talking about Christianity. We're talking about Nickianity. Nick has his views on morality and finds it makes him happy if he believes that there's a God that agrees with him on morality.
Believe or live in faith of. There's no.
Okay.
Life is.
Let me amend this, which is not going to make you look better, by the way. Nick has a view about morality and finds that it makes him happy to act as if there's a God who agrees with his view on morality.
Mm-hmm.
Do you care whether or not you're correct?
Correct that there is a God?
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, of course I do care.
Okay. Do you want your beliefs to be true or comforting?
Well, see, I do care whether they're true or not, but I also recognize why God doesn't just, like, if God exists, the reason he doesn't just reveal himself to us is because this life is a moral test. And the fact that he conceals
So you're fine with a douchebag God who decides that he's not going to reveal himself and he's going to put us to the test. How do you know that you got the right answers to the test?
Well, because logically, the only way that we could be morally tested to see who is righteous enough, per se, to go to heaven and who is not, is who accepts the idea that life is pretty much an abomination with all the injustice in the world. And morally, you should not be able to be happy with all of this horrible stuff.
Oh, bullshit.
Stuff that happens.
So first of all, every time you start to talk a little bit more, you get further and further away from anything that remotely resembles Christianity. So let's just acknowledge this. You're not talking about Jesus or Christianity because the Bible's irrelevant. What the Bible actually says is irrelevant. What it says about salvation is relevant because just a minute ago, you talked about who is or isn't righteous. And while it pains me to put back on my Christian hat in order to school you, there is none righteous, no, not one. That's what the Bible actually says. So I'm glad you've tossed the Bible out, but basically you've invented this idea of morality and righteousness. And then you're willing to act in faith and believe that there's a God who agrees with you. What if there is a God and he doesn't agree with you?
Well, then, if I don't agree with him, he's not right, basically.
Oh.
I believe I'm right.
You are then the ultimate authority on what is right. And if there's a God that doesn't agree with you, that God's wrong.
We're getting somewhere. We're getting rid of the baggage.
I believe moral beliefs. Well, they're not really relevant. But I believe morally what I believe, and therefore, if I'm right, God should match.
Yeah, if you're right, and if God is perfectly moral, you left that part out. If you are correct, and if God is perfectly moral, then the two of you should agree. The question is, if you don't agree, how do you tell whether or not you're right or God's right?
Well, I look to God, and I believe the Bible, so I look to see what the Bible says. But
okay, the Bible says slavery is okay. Is slavery moral or immoral?
No, I don't believe that it does.
You don't believe that it does?
It existed in the past.
No. The Bible talks about slavery and never condemns it, never says it's immoral, and expressly says who you can and can't enslave.
Doesn't have any time limits or expiration dates or anything like that.
Yeah, I can't really answer why it wasn't, said to be immoral after the fact, after its purpose. I can't really answer that.
Well, a minute ago you said the Bible was irrelevant, and now you've gone back to the Bible. So, Nick, can we just agree that you're just making all this shit up to feel good?
No, I don't. I can't.
Okay, if that's not the case, how do you demonstrate that it's true?
Well, maybe I can say that, actually.
Okay. Then that's all I need.
Logical.
I got a lot of other callers. Thanks for hanging out. Just for the record, well, I appreciate those conversations where people are ultimately honest and in addressing when they've made the point.
Well, one of the most honest comments I've ever gotten was, "It makes me feel good."
Yeah.
And gosh, I can't argue with that.
I can. I can, and I do,
and I
will.
Okay, I'm
Because, and this is important. I know this is important. If it gets you to the point where you say, "I believe this because it makes me feel good," I appreciate the honesty there, and that you have put yourself above God or truth or reason or reality. Unfortunately, what makes you feel good in the moment isn't necessarily what's good for you. Just like getting completely shit-faced might make you feel good for a while.
Heroin addiction. Yeah,
Heroin. Woo! Not necessarily a good thing. And if you believe things that are ultimately untrue, you make decisions based on what you believe. And if your view is that I am the absolute ultimate arbiter of morality and can't be wrong, and so, first of all, I think each of us are the arbiters of our own views on morality. But whether or not you're right about it is the result of considering the consequences of actions with respect to the physical facts about reality.
Yeah, a little humility, please.
But if your whole thing is, I believe because it makes me feel good, then please explain how you can feel good about what it is that you're saying. Because even in Nick's case, he's going to pick and choose from the Bible, chuck it out when it supports slavery, but accept a particular verse over here. But
at the frequency of several sentences, right?
But throw out what it says about salvation in order to try and create your own everybody's saved or nobody's saved model. But at the end of the day, what Nick is acting as if he believes is that there's a God who agrees with him right down the line. Nick, you're God. That's the only way that's possible.
Right. And this is a very dangerous attitude. Like, if God's on your side, you can go kill people that God doesn't like, and everything's moral.
Yeah. It's one of those things where the reason that I care about whether or not my beliefs are true is because the truth matters. Because I'd like my internal model of reality to match reality as best as I can. It's never going to be perfect. I'm never going to get it all right. If there was a God, and he got to sit down and maybe call into the show, although I'd prefer it be in person, and I told him what my moral thinking was on a subject, and that God told me what his moral thinking was on a subject, I would hope that we could have a conversation about the how and why and determine which of us is actually correct, and not just assume that one of us is necessarily correct at all. But when you go down this path, it is more, in my opinion, about, well, I don't like organized religions, and I don't like these particular passages in this text, and I was raised along these kind of lines, and so Judaism seems a little too legalistic for me, whereas Christianity, an ultimately capricious God elects who he is or isn't going to save, hides from people, doesn't offer sufficient evidence, something that you, Nick, completely acknowledged, and then you say, well, I can't believe based on evidence, but you know what? Sure feels good to think somebody agrees with me, so I'm going to act like that's the case. Well, I actually care whether or not you're right, rather than whether you're good. You have to face the harsh reality that sometimes the world is unjust. Well, guess what? All the evidence points to the fact that sometimes the world is unjust, that the universe doesn't give a rat's ass about you, that somebody's going to get away with a crime, that somebody else is not going to get away with a crime.
And heck, isn't it better to do something about that than to just roll over and pretend the world's something else?
But the problem is that if you only recognize that somebody's going to get away with a crime and fail to acknowledge that somebody else isn't, then that sways you completely towards it's futile, it's crap, the universe is garbage, there's no justice. But if instead you acknowledge that some people aren't going to get away with crimes, that it is us, We, the people who are engaging to build a society that has as much justice as we can get, and we're doing pretty good at it. We're not perfect. But if you toss all that aside, of course the universe looks like crap and it would make you feel good. But if instead, to think of it, that there's a God who agrees with you. But if there's a God that agrees with you, ask yourself this: do I want a better world? And if God agrees with you, why hasn't he done anything to fix this problem of the better world?
Yeah, he's omnipotent and omniscient. He should know.
Yeah.
Look up problem of evil.
You are better than the God you believe in, even when you do this twisted sort